think in the tradition of Lenny Bruce, Richard Pryor, George Carlin, that the comic is also kind of a dissident. And I think that in this era, by the way, that we're coming out of, people like you and Tim Dillon and others played that role, that there were these podcasts, or Andrew Schultz or others, where you would listen and you would hear things that you knew, like, oh, you can't say that, but you kind of want to hear it because it's like, hey, why is it that we can't say it?
Yeah.
So in some ways, like, and that's what a dissident was in a different context, like, under, I'm not comparing America to the Soviet Union, but that would be like, the equivalent of like Václav Havel, wrote essays and plays that were banned by the state, but like that people had to see them and read them. And it was very important because that was that release. And comedy kind of plays that role in our society.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so many different kinds too. What was really fascinating listening to your podcast about the comedy and Lenny Bruce in particular, so many things I didn't know about Lenny Bruce. For one, I had no idea. There was just a lot I didn't know about his history that I thought I knew. And
Can I ask you a question? Do you think it's still funny?
Lenny? Or
yeah.
I didn't know that he was like, I didn't know he was persecuted or prosecuted, or I'm not sure. Was he actually? I can't remember now. But his jokes about Jackie Kennedy, I didn't know that was, some verboten thing that you couldn't say. It was like, how dare you? Do you desecrate the sanctity of this like moment with Jackie Kennedy and her husband being shot? And what was also interesting listening to your podcast, I don't know, my brain I've been trying to think about so many things because it really made me think about all these things at once. So there's that where I'm like, we don't have a dominant culture. This is something Colin and I were just talking about over the weekend. There is not like mainstream America. We don't have a couple of channels that we all gather around. Everything is fractured now. Yeah. We have all these tiny niche audiences. Yes, Joe's podcast is huge. Kill Tony is huge. But that's still not the dominant culture. I still don't know that everybody knows what Kill Tony is. I don't think my dad knows who has ever heard of that podcast. Even the first time I went on Joe's podcast in 2019, it was the biggest podcast in the world, and my dad had never heard of him. My dad had never heard of him until CNN went after him during COVID. And that's when he was like, hey, is Joe Rogan that guy whose podcast you went on? But this is how I kind of.
By the way, to the shame of SNL for also going after him.
Yeah. But they only make him more. They only make him more famous. He was not. I would consider a household name.
Well, this is my thing. I disagree with CNN, and I don't know. I think you and I both had our red pill paths. Like I had my red pill path for something called Russiagate in the first term, and I wrote a bunch of pieces saying, hey, I think this Russiagate stuff is bullshit.
I remember.
And let's just say I got a lot of shit from other mainstream journalists, and I didn't get invited to cocktail parties I used to get invited to, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So but like for me, it's like, okay, CNN wants to do this ridiculous thing. Kind of understand it. But if you're a comic and you're going to go after other comics and you can't understand that you're fashioning a rod for your own back,
right?
Shame on you.
Yeah.
Like, so when SNL did the bit where they had like Joe Rogan and I forget what the drug that he thought was good, which turned out to be pretty good anyway. Ivermectin, right?
Yeah.
Which turns out, by the way, ivermectin is great. Like, it cures a bunch of things. But anyway, leaving all that aside, like SNL like goes after him. I was like, there's something like deeply wrong and rotten with the culture and this institution. And I saw there were others like I don't know. I'll name some names, like Andy Richter went after people like who, you know what I mean, who who crossed whatever, kind of woke red lines at the time. And to me, and like the worst was Stephen Colbert. Like Stephen Colbert, I don't know, in 2013 was hilarious. Like when he did the Colbert Report on Comedy Central, I thought it was one of the funniest things. And now he's just become an unfunny jester for the 1%. And, I just feel like he's just doing like, it's not funny anymore. It's like stand-up polemicist.
Yeah.
Stand-up polemicist. But also it's like he's like, there was like a fifth column, everybody in comedy should be like, everybody in comedy should argue about everything.
Yeah.
But they should be in agreement on one thing, which is that don't go after our platform, because this is the one place in the culture where there cannot be any limits on what we say, because that's what we do.
Right.
And so when you started seeing comedians turning on other comedians like that, to me, I was just like, okay, well,
that was it for me for a lot of people. I mean, that was what was happening in 2015, 2016. And it was very frustrating seeing from people who I idolized, like Sarah Silverman is one. And I was like, you made your name being subversive, being pushing the edges, saying the uncomfortable thing. And now it feels a little bit like you're pulling the ladder up behind you. She was like, I don't understand why you hate me. I'm like, I don't
100%.
hate you. I just don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair that now, in order to kind of protect yourself, because you did things that you're being criticized by this new mob that's running out of people to cancel. So they're looking for people who made jokes that they maybe wouldn't make today 10 years ago, that you're now throwing new comedians under the bus, because what chance do they have? You can't find... I mean, you have to be able to go over the line to kind of find where it is. Because generally, if you go over the line, you're gonna get a groan. You're not gonna get a laugh.
That's why those first Chappelle specials were such an event.
Mm-hmm.
He was willing to go on his special and say, you know what, Louis C.K. is my friend, and these women who say that they ruined their careers in comedy have a brittle spirit. That was his joke.
Yeah.
That was a joke, and it was funny. This is the thing, by the way. Colin Quinn, when I was going through this and like interviewing him, he said, okay, yeah, but like it has to be funny.
Right.
Like if it's not funny, it's not comedy. And I appreciate his point. Or like the alphabet people thing, which I played in the podcast. Those were jokes, but they were also like really important kind of cultural moments, because that was the guy, and he did have that platform. I mean, Chappelle is somebody who reached, tens of millions of people. And that made it so that we, people can say, wait a second, why am I, going along with some of these taboos? Is it the end of the world? Is our words violence? That kind of thing. And we were getting a lot of it. So, that's why I think Chappelle, is the god right now. And some of these other people who were as big as Chappelle 10 years ago are kind of culturally relevant at this point.
Yeah. And I do agree with Colin in that, you hear a lot about like, oh, it's subversive. And then what happens at moments like this in comedy is everybody thinks, oh, now if I'm saying something that's getting groans, or if I'm saying something that isn't getting a laugh, it's because it's too much for the culture, or I'm saying, making a bad joke about Hitler, or making a joke about whatever. It's because it's too much, and it's not just inherently because it's not funny. So what happens when this kind of pendulum swings is now you've got really a lot of this stuff is very kind of lowest common denominator. And it's like, just because you're saying something racist doesn't mean it's funny. It might be racist.
Right.
And so this is where I think Colin is a genius, is that his loyalty is to just what's funny. It doesn't matter if it's subversive, or it doesn't matter if it's not. It just matters, is it funny or is it not?